everybody, man. Y'all ooh, my peoples out there who are watching me. Are we gonna jam today? This brother is tight. Y'all gonna really like this one. Y'all like all of them. Y'all gonna like this one a lot. He's proficient. He's effective. And he's all them adverbs and adjectives all rolled in one. And man, we got a story that's gonna blow your mind. I'm Anthony Brogdon, and this is what I do. I'm a better person as a result of strong inspirations and people like this who come on the show, who tell the stories. They scholars, they experts, they live through it or otherwise. And they talk about it with such passion. You're gonna feel it as he discusses what he gonna discuss with us today. So hit the subscribe button. Come on now, everybody. The numbers is up and it don't cost no money. This is free FREE Black History. It is my way of keeping Black history alive. Now, let me tell you, I got a personal investment in this. I learned so much that I'm a better person as a result of the people that come on the show. So I got no problem doing this for you, my friends. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. There is no love button. Hit the notifications bell so you get a ding, a shock, a smoke signal. Your dog kicks you, your horn on your car goes off, something to let you know there is new content. And I'm releasing at least 3 or 4 every week. Some of them are re-released because I know you didn't watch it. Did you see the one I did with the guy who went back to 1600 on the genealogy of his family? Watch that video. Did you see the one I did with the lady who is the national president of the African American Historical Genealogy Society? Watch that video. Did you see the one I did with the guy who his two-time great-grandfather was enslaved? He had a business. He bought his freedom and the freedom of 15 other people. Then he went out and bought his land in Illinois. Watch that video. Watch the one. I mean, just watch them all. Just take time. It's YouTube. You can go. You can move the cursor to get around me. Get to the point. You in them classrooms, and I really want y'all to take the time, not just during Black History Month. There are topics of all forms on here. You can do that with within the time of your classroom, and then have them discuss it. Do that. That's why I'm here for you, my friends. Now you know that I'm an author, everybody. Boom, that's the book right there. You got to get you a copy of this book, Black Business Book, over 200 facts. It's really close to 260, 270. I got 40 Black-owned banks in here. I got 30 Black-owned newspapers. I got all the HBCUs, all of the fraternities and sororities, all of the organizations that we did to network among ourselves, not business, but social, the founding of the NAACP, and so on and so forth. Get you a copy of this. It's reasonably priced because I don't need them in my basement. I know what's in this book. I want you all to have it. And I got a new option, everybody. It come in this felt box for safekeeping because it's that important. So you can get it in both with or without the box, but just get it. Go to my website, businessintheblack.net. You can hear where I'm speaking. I got some sessions coming up where I'll be in Atlanta at the ASALA convention. I'll be in DC at the Congressional Black Caucus. And maybe I'm working this out. I'm going to London, England in October because that is their Black History Month. So watch out for me, everybody. Do that. Go to businessintheblack.net. Now, you hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong is my favorite word. And in my world, strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is the introduction to the strong brother on the channel. Come on, cool man. Introduce yourself. Let's get it on.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Brogdon. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on the show today. My name is Jarvis McInnes. I'm an associate professor of English at Duke University, where I teach African American and African diaspora literature and culture. I've been there since about 2017, and I teach a range of literatures from mostly focusing on the U.S. South and the Caribbean, which is also the focus of my book.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so very much for having us. We're gonna get into this too,
I'm
everybody.
looking forward
I
to
heard
it.
what he said, that PhD thing, and we're gonna watch this. Now, but before we do, I want to let the audience get to know you just a tad. Where
Yes,
were you
sir.
born and raised?
Born and raised in Gulfport, Mississippi.
Is that right? Okay.
That's
Where's
right.
Gulfport? I've never been there.
So it's right next to Biloxi. It's right on the coast. It's about an hour east of New Orleans and about an hour west of Mobile, Alabama.
Oh, okay. Is it? Did you grow up in a black neighborhood, or what was the dynamic of the community?
Not necessarily a black neighborhood, pretty mixed though. And but very definitely grew up in a black a strong black church. Also grew up in a strong black community. There was lots of really wonderful community organizations that I actually credit for my success because they poured into me significantly growing up. I grew up as a motivational speaker. I started speaking around the age of 7 years old. Started with Bible storytelling, and from there, I was invited to. I actually began to recite the "I Have a Dream" speech by Dr. King when I was probably in my single digits, around fourth grade or so. And from there, that created more opportunities for me to speak at Black History programs and other youth group programs and so forth and so on. And so, because my community saw that I had that particular skill or gift or talent, they really poured into me, and I'm grateful for that strong Black community in particular. But there was a wider sort of interracial community as well that supported me and lifted me up, and they've continued to support me to this
Sure.
very day.
All right. Well, hold on. You say whiter community. That's because your family lived in a neighborhood that some white people lived in, but there was a black neighborhood on the other side of the tracks. Is that the dynamic, may I ask?
No, 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 not necessarily. It was very much a mixed community. So Black and
Really?
white people and people of different, racial backgrounds, Asian and so forth and so on, lived closely to each other in a traditional neighborhood, right? But I did. My dad grew up in a predominantly Black community, and that's where my grandparents lived. And I visited there. I spent a lot of time there. That's like it was my second home. And
In
so I
Gulfport.
did in Gulfport, and there was a Boys and Girls Club there, and I was a member of that Boys and Girls Club. It was a predominantly Black Boys and Girls Club, and through that neighborhood, through other sort of civic and social organizations, business organizations in my community that were predominantly Black, I was able to pursue a lots of opportunities that I otherwise would not have had access to.
All right. How about this? We're gonna go in. We're gonna. I'm gonna get you on this one. Did so you had white friends?
Of course, yes, absolutely.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I still do to this very day.
Yeah. Okay. What is it like to play with white kids? In this regard, I didn't have many, any at all. Did
Yeah.
did they accept you to come in their home, or you have to play in the yard, but don't come inside? They
You
came
know,
over to your house. Well, how did
yeah,
that go?
yeah, I think for the most part that was the case, especially when I was very young. I grew up in Mississippi, so you still saw, I still experienced some of the residue of certain forms of social segregation, not in my day-to-day life, but certainly in sort of social environment. So what I mean by that is, um, I certainly had access to and was in friendship and was in community with people of different races and backgrounds, but I may not have always been in close contact in their homes in the way that you say, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Certainly, I was telling a friend this story the other day, that I was a member of a Taekwondo school. I performed martial arts growing up, and one of the junior instructors at the school was my neighbor. He lived across the street. Unfortunately, his parents were racist and they were anti-black. And so at the Taekwondo school, he and I were very good friends, kind of like a big brother. And he taught me new kicks and new punches and
Yeah,
different
yeah, sure.
techniques of that particular art form. But when we were home, unfortunately, he was not able to speak to me. Now, my parents had no problem, right, with him or his parents or his family, people of different backgrounds, but his family did not allow him
How you know that?
to be my friends. Oh, well, he couldn't speak to me. He never spoke to me. He was not allowed to do so. It was a kind of unspoken thing because we might, let's say we were heading to the taekwondo school at the same time. I see him across the street. I'm not able to speak to him or to interact with him. But the moment we get to that taekwondo school, we are friendly there.
All
So
right,
I would I
okay.
wouldn't describe. I want to say that is um, a unusual and uncharacteristic example, right, of interracial friction that I experienced growing up. But going to school, and I have very close friends with people from other races that I grew up with, whose families embrace me and whose families continue to embrace me and celebrate
Yeah,
break
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
And so forth and so on. So that's the extreme, right, of what I experienced. But for the most part, I felt welcomed and loved and uh,
Yeah.
poured
I want to
into.
stay on that just a tad. So was they were teaching him to be a racist.
I don't know what they were teaching him. I actually can't speak to what they
Yeah,
were
but I'm
teaching
saying if
him.
you would
It
assume such,
it
that
seems
might
to
be
be
it.
it seems to be the case, but it seems like he had his own mind, right? He made up his own mind
Oh,
because
okay.
he was committed to being my friend and being kind to me outside of that space. But they were his parents, and he had to honor what
Yeah.
their or at least, if not honor it, abide by their rules in that home. But outside of that home, we had a pretty regular,
Yeah. Did
relation.
did
I wouldn't call it a
did
friendship. He was a bit older than I was.
did your parents face anything racist being in that neighborhood? Because you in a middle class neighborhood. I'm taking liberties. Is that what you're telling me?
I would say it was aspirational. I would say
Yeah.
that it's a,
Okay.
a kind of
Okay. Okay.
lower middle class neighborhood.
Okay.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
Did your parents face anything when they first moved to the neighborhood or any of that kind of thing?
Not to my knowledge, no, no. And in fact, we had other neighbors again of other backgrounds. There was a wonderful couple. They moved away when I was still very small, named Steve and Linda. They were in the military. They were white, and they lived across the street from us. And I was in their home, and when they had a little girl, they would bring me in the home. I'd play with the little girl, and so forth and so on. So it wasn't a contentious or necessarily a kind of yeah, a racially contentious
Yeah, in
growing
some
up in that
instances, yeah,
neighborhood all the time. But there were people, and I think that this is the case today, obviously, and not only in Mississippi but elsewhere. There were people who were not comfortable with, or who held anti-black, views or sentiments, who did not embrace me, as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Where were the black people? Where was the hood at compared to where you live? Let's call it that.
I would say it was about 7 or 10 minutes away. A predominantly black neighborhood, the North Gulfport area, Turnkey or Forest Heights is where my grandmother lived. Those were all predominantly black areas. Yeah.
Was there a divide of a railroad track?
No railroad track. I mean, I grew up I was born in the late 80s and grew up in the 90s. So, it's a bit different from, say, something like Richard Wright's The Ethics of Living Jim Crow or Richard Wright's
Yeah, yeah,
writings about growing up in the South in the 20s and 30s. It was much more integrated in terms of where people lived. And there were communities that were predominantly white there, the social community, other places, and there are ways in which you could see how race divided people,
right,
both in terms of their living conditions, and in terms of both spatially and socially.
right.
But um, it wasn't something that I felt and that I encountered, or that limited my sort of pursuit of academic excellence, or
Sure, sure,
uh, or
sure.
that or that really shrouded the kind of dreams that I could imagine for myself, thankfully, right?
All right.
I'm grateful to have grown up in a different Mississippi,
I
right?
got you. I
And I
got you.
think that because I grew up in that different Mississippi, that it allowed me to think about the South critically in the way that I do in the book, and try to capture the resilience of Black folk in that region, the beauty, the intellectual ingenuity of Black folks in that region, because I was able to see it from a different vantage point,
All
perhaps.
right, we're gonna stay on this just a tag because I'm
Yeah.
gonna get somewhere with you. Did did you was you scared to go in the hood? Because you spoke proper. Was you know what I mean?
I
You
can
get over there and they wondering, hey, who is this dude? You know, nice shirt or whatever, and you go over to the hood. Did you go over? You know what I mean? What was your feeling in that regard?
I don't know that I would call it the hood per se, but I did grow up moving back and forth across like different um uh class backgrounds, I suppose,
I got
or
you.
right. And so um, I could code switch in the
That's the
across,
word I want to
right?
use.
I could
Yes,
code switch across different sort of class identities as well as racial identities, and so forth and so on. So, I am very grateful for the fact that I grew up going to my grandparents' house and spending time in that community, which is a working class black community, because it allowed me to be disabused of certain kinds of class bias, right? That sometimes that some middle class folk can have, for people who exist in, or who live or are from other class backgrounds, right?
right.
It allowed me to appreciate, again, the resilience, the ingenuity, the brilliance, the creativity, right? I mean, that's who I am, right?
Right.
It's not even that I grew up firmly in a middle class community. My class background also changed across my lifetime, right?
Yeah, sure,
And so
sure,
because of
sure,
that, I
sure.
feel very connected to a kind of working class black community, because that's where I'm from, right? That's my family.
Yes,
Those are my people. My people are from the country, right?
yes,
And so
yes.
there is no fear about going into that community because that's my family, right?
Okay,
And so I'm very
that
proud of that background, but
yes.
and through public speaking, through education and so forth and so on, I was able to I have been able to sort of move to I suppose a kind of firmly middle class,
Okay.
background and identity.
I'm gonna stay on that just a tad.
Okay.
From growing up in your background, and I'm giving it more liberty than maybe it is. Did did you what's the difference between black people who have a little something and black people who don't?
Mhm. You
From a
know,
historical standpoint, I want to go
mhm.
into that, and then maybe from a personal standpoint, what did you see as maybe a difference?
um, do you mean a material difference, or
Well, not
could you?
from an attitude standpoint. Let's call it
Oh,
that.
I see. From an attitude standpoint.
While you thinking it over,
Yeah,
I'll give you a personal story. I
sure.
kind of grew up in the middle class. My dad he gone to college and so on and so forth. He was in social services, so he didn't make a lot of money, but nonetheless, we went over an aunt's house, and she must have told somebody about my dad having a foreign car before foreign cars were popular. This lady catches him and she says, "Who in the heck you think you are? You think you better than us?" And she gave him the riot act. He looked at her and said, "First, who are you?" And I'll never forget that moment.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
what is that dynamic? Can you speak to that in any regard?
I can speak to it from a personal experience and just say,
Yes.
um, I was very fortunate to grow up in a place where I didn't experience class difference uh, very acutely and didn't really have a strong understanding of it until I went to college. So I grew up in Gulfport, and then I went to college in Jackson, Mississippi, and Jackson at Tougaloo College, which is a small HBCU there.
Yes.
And so I
Yes.
think that it was when I moved to Jackson, which is a predominantly black city, that I began to understand class difference in a different kind of way. Because in Gulfport, black people were still the minority. So there was still a strong sense of black community. And certainly there is one in Jackson as well. But I think when black people are in the majority, right, there are different those class distinctions actually matter a bit more. I was not introduced to Jack and Jill, for instance, or other black social organizations that that are organized around class identity, right?
Yes, right,
I was not aware of the links, and so forth. I
right,
learned all of
right.
that when I moved to Jackson for college. In Gulfport, the Black community is a minority, is in the minority. So as a result, I experienced and I had close contact with both working class Black people and sort of the professional and middle class, right?
Yes,
I don't know that we would have had an upper class Black communities. Jackson certainly did. We did not. And so class was more fluid. Right, in a place where we were the minority and we were smaller, and so even at my church, right, there were working class Black folk who were there, right, and then there were also Black professionals, attorneys,
sure,
and so
sure,
forth, and
sure.
lots of educators. And so because of that, I felt like there was much more synergy is not the right word, but much more contact, right, between Black folk of different class identities and backgrounds. And it was
Sure.
often the case that the Black people that I grew up around who were in the professional or middle class were only one generation removed from that, right, as well.
Yes,
And
yes,
so
yes,
and
yes.
so there was much more um, fluidity again, right, between folks from different backgrounds, which I actually am very grateful for because it means that I don't think I grew up with a strong sort of class bias,
I
right?
got you. I
But I
got you.
did I did have to learn how to think about class more critically, especially in writing this book, right?
I got you.
And
I got you.
so I'm grateful that I did not. Um, that my family and that my community impressed on me, right? The value and the contributions and the of people from a range of class backgrounds, and because I think that um, uh, it helped to prevent me from cultivating a sense of elitism that I
I
put to
got you.
the
There
book.
you go.
Yeah,
There
absolutely.
you go. Let me ask
Absolutely.
you
And it
this.
doesn't mean, and lastly, what I'll say about the way I speak, right? I said I code switch. So I tell people often I speak Southernese fluently, right? Especially if I'm around my family and friends. But it doesn't mean that people, that I didn't have classmates who would say, oh, you talk white, or something
Yes,
like that. But I
yes,
would,
yes,
but I would push them on that. I would say, well, what does that mean? What do you
yes,
mean by that? Right? That's an
yes.
ignorant statement. And let's interrogate that more, right? I didn't have the language of interrogate, but
Right,
I
right,
would
right,
I
right,
would I would push back on that, right?
right, right.
And so but I was very fortunate that people came to respect the way that I speak. People came
Yes.
to respect my contributions to the community as a motivational speaker. And I think it's because I was born right at that intersection. I lived at that
I got you.
intersection
Yeah,
between
I
the
got
working
you.
class and the middle class. And so, and I did not grow up in a place, again, that bred a sense of class bias or class paternalism or
I got you.
elitism, and I'm grateful for that.
Did they teach you Black history in school? What was your
Not
first
enough.
introduction to some Black history
It
stuff?
was always through the church and through social organizations, right? It
Okay,
was
okay.
through Black civic organizations. Workers Helping Youth was an organization that I participated in, and there was an elderly black man named Reverend Harry Tart, who was a Renaissance man. So he sang and he acted. He was a veteran, had formerly been in the military, and so he worked with youth, as a retired teacher. And through this organization, through him and a woman named Miss Christine Bryce, they allowed us to participate in Black History programs and Fourth of July celebrations, etc. But also through my church, right? Through Black History programs at my church. So unfortunately, my school curriculum did not have enough Black history, but I grew up in a strong Black community that said, essentially, our kids, our young people are not getting this in the schools. We are going to make sure that they
I
get it
love it.
in
There
communities.
you go.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Just one more on your family. Where's the
Mhm.
enslavement at? Do you go back to say where the plantation is? I know you're out of Mississippi. What
Where
like
my
great
fam-
great grandfathers and stuff like that. You know that story?
I've done some genealogical work. A lot of it is, oral histories passed down from family members. I don't know where in Mississippi my family has been enslaved. Or was enslaved. I would have to do a bit more genealogical work. But I do have. There are a few stories in my family that I'm trying to track down. One is that. and I say oral history because I've not been able um, to verify it through the archive.
Yeah,
But
yeah, sure.
but one story is that we are the descendants on my mom's side of a black woman who came from Cuba. With her children aboard a slave ship in the 19th century. We do have a picture of her. Her name
Really?
is Nancy Monia Woods Bradley. I suspect that she may have been from Cuba, Alabama, though, which is the same latitude as the area in Mississippi where my family ended up. But she does appear to be a mixed race woman, and so her story is a story that I'm still in the process of tracking. And then there's a story on my father's side of a young boy who was trafficked from North Carolina to Mississippi, which makes sense given the internal slave trade from the Upper South into the Lower South in the 19th century. And he was about 8 years old when he came to Mississippi. He came alone, and he had a wooden necklace on around his neck. And on one side of the necklace, it said NO.CAR. Perhaps North Carolina, most right, and on the other side it said Igbo, and which could mean that he was either from the Igbo tribe in Nigeria, but it's also the case that Igbo would have meant stranger in general. There's a scholar who writes about the way that term did not only refer to people who were from that particular tribe in West Africa, but his name, I believe, was Jake. Jake McInnes. And as I understand it, after slavery ended, he married his former master's daughter, whose name
Whoa,
is,
really?
again, this
Yeah,
is
but still,
oral
nonetheless.
history.
Yes.
Um, he married his former enslaver's daughter, whose name was Emma. They called her Ma M. And then he attended Alcorn State University and studied agriculture there. So his story is another one that I'm very interested in trying to
Sure,
track
sure.
and reconstitute, I suppose, and see where the oral history intersects with the archive.
Well,
But yes.
what led you to study what you study? To get your
Um,
doctorate in this and that kind of thing.
yeah.
How did you get to this point?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I attended Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, and I had wonderful mentors there. Dr. Candace Love Jackson was an English professor there. Dr. Barbara Deese was an English professor there. And they introduced me to the Mellon program, which is a program that um, uh, helps to prepare students who are sophomores or juniors in college to pursue a PhD. A PhD was not on my radar. I thought that I would go into a legal career and then into politics. But then I discovered a love for literature in college. There's another professor at Tougaloo who was really important. I took her class, and it just it was transformative for me. And I realized that I love literature, right? Her name is Jacqueline Wheelock. I took her world history course, and I read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, and I read literature by Bessie Head, and I read literature by Nella Larson, who was a writer of the Harlem Renaissance. And so I was introduced to Black diasporic literature, and I became really interested in the ways that literature was a kind of vista into Black culture, not only in the United States but around the world. And I became really interested in how the Black experience in, say, the Caribbean or in parts of Africa was similar to or different from the Black experience in the United States. And so through the Mellon program, I set out to do a research project, right, that explored Richard Wright's work and the importance of blues music, right, in Richard Wright's work. And then as I learned how to that introduction to literary analysis and criticism, it validated for me, confirmed for me that the PhD was the correct
Yeah,
path,
yeah,
right,
I
a
like that.
career path for me. And then I went on to pursue a PhD in African American literature, well, English and comparative literature with an emphasis in African American and African diaspora literature at Columbia University in New York City.
What is literature? You keep using that term. What is that same thing as English? Is that same thing as reading? Yeah, what is literature? What does that mean?
Yeah. So when I refer to literature, I'm referring to primarily to writing that has been produced by Black people, right?
Okay,
So
okay.
typically when we think about literature, the traditional genres are fiction, so novels, right, and short stories and plays and poetry, and so those are kind of the some of the primary genres that we refer to. But I'm very interested in, scholars who study earlier literature say, hey, we have to look at nonfiction as well, right? And not just autobiographies, but we have to look at newspapers, right? Because there was so much important work happening, especially in the 19th century, in the 20th century, in Black newspapers, right? Frederick Douglass owned a newspaper, and Black newspapers were the way that Black people circulated ideas, right? Not only in the United States, but globally. How Black people learned about each other and what Black people were doing in different parts of the world through the circulation of these texts, right? And so I'm also, thinking about ethnographies, right? I'm also thinking
Well,
about
hold on, stop there. What are those?
journals. So, and
Okay.
and and ethnographic study, we might think about someone who is it's similar to an oral history, I suppose, generically, but it's going into a community and learning about the culture of that community. We might think about someone like Zora Neale Hurston, right, who
Oh,
is
I see.
a who was a trained anthropologist, and she conducted ethnographies of Black folk life and folk culture both in the U.S. South and in the Caribbean. So Hurston goes to Florida, where she was from, and she goes to Louisiana, and she is recording the various aspects of Black culture, of the Black experience, right, in those areas. So she was interested in short story in Black folk lore, right? So the music, the dance practices, the Charleston, right? She's interested in Black people who are telling stories, especially. So think about the Brer Rabbit stories, or God and the Devil stories, right? They were very
I got
prominent
you.
in Black communities, and so she says, hey. There is a lot of wisdom in these stories. There's a lot of uh, um, uh, philosophical sophistication, right? These stories tell us how Black people understand their place in the world, right? And so she goes to those communities and is talking to those Black people, many of whom people had really written off as being country, as being backward, as being provincial, right? And so she says, no, there is so much cultural richness here, and we have to capture it before we lose it, before these people die, right?
I got you.
And ethnography is your attempt to capture a a specific the dynamics of a specific culture on the page, right? And so in an English department, you're typically studying those first genres that I mentioned: fiction, theater, poetry, autobiographies. But we are also studying, we have come to open up, right, the objects of study to print culture like newspapers and journals and magazines, but also music, right? I study music. I study, the blues and jazz, and think about the intersections between music and the Black literary tradition, in part because for so long, Black people were not allowed to read and write, right?
I
So,
see what you
so,
said.
so if we really want to understand a Black worldview, we have to go to the other cultural artifacts that Black people produced, right? Which is their music, which is their dance, which is their visual art, and so forth and so on. So, as someone who's
I got
trained in English, but is also very much committed to African American studies, which is more, it is a broader disciplinary and more interdisciplinary field. I draw both on the written tradition, but also the oral tradition, right?
you.
As
Let
well
me
as
ask you
the
this.
musical tradition, etc.
Let me ask you this, and maybe I'm getting it. What you're doing is you're studying the history of what has been written,
Correct. Yes, that's
and
exactly
then
right.
you also study who wrote it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Ah, I got you.
That's right. That's right. So
So,
I'm
so your
interested.
history is different than other history. You don't necessarily study events.
I do study events as well.
Okay.
I
but
do.
what has been written in various forms is the literature.
That's right.
And now you're
That's
trying.
right.
Do you also want to say why they wrote it?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So for
Oh,
instance,
I got
my book begins with Booker T with a quote from Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up from Slavery, right? And so I take a passage from that autobiography to invite us into a deeper understanding of what Booker T. Washington was doing at a place like Tuskegee, right? To understand the origins of this historically Black institution, what it meant to attempt to establish a school on the site of a former plantation, right? What was fraught about that project, right? But also what was necessary about that project in the immediate aftermath of slavery, when Black people had so little access, right, to land, to resources,
right,
et
right, right.
cetera, right? And so I use the this literary document, right, this text, as a way to understand the figure himself, right, Booker T. Washington, but also to understand his institution, right? So my book is also a cultural um, history of Tuskegee, but also how those ideas then circulated, right, to Black people in other parts of the world, right, to Cuba, to Haiti, to Puerto Rico, to Guyana, to Jamaica, and also who were the Black people who were employed at those at a place like Tuskegee? Someone like George Washington Carver, right, and the significance of his work as an agricultural scientist, right, and how is it that Tuskegee was invested in helping to care for the Black folk in the countryside who didn't have access to formal education, but also how they were not necessarily Carver, but Washington and Washington's wife, Margaret Murray Washington, and other Tuskegee faculty members, how they also were held a kind of class bias, right? And participated in a kind of class paternalism to those rural, uneducated Black folk in the countryside, right? The kind of class bias and elitism that I described earlier. So the book is really trying to wrestle with what it means to for a Black institution to enact care and to disseminate education and to disseminate resources, right, for people who are disadvantaged. But also, what happens when that institution is also has a kind of elitist attitude toward the very people that is trying to help, right?
Oh,
And so
really?
the paradox of that, as it relates to Tuskegee in particular, but also just to that generation of Black people who were invested in uplifting the race in the late 19th to the early 20th century. Because not only was Booker T. Washington or Tuskegee not they weren't the only folks who reflected that sort of class bias. W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells, all of those, their Washington's contemporaries shared many of those ideas, even as we can think of racial uplift as a kind of spectrum, right? And they existed in different places on that spectrum. But there was a
I got
class
you.
bias, a class elitism, right? That I contend with in the book, in addition to the fact that they are trying to materially improve Black people's lives in the aftermath of slavery.
Okay, you got a copy of the book you can show us and tell
I
us the
do.
title of it and
Yes,
everything?
absolutely. Yes. So the book is entitled Afterlives of the Plantation: Plotting Agrarian Futures in the Global Black South. It's available everywhere that books are sold.
Okay.
If you go to the Columbia University website, that's the publisher, and you use the code CUP20SM. If you use that code CUP20SM, you can receive 20% off on
Okay.
the book.
Okay. Well, let's talk about how did you choose this topic to write about?
You know, I feel that the topic chose me in some way. So I actually came to this book through the work of Zora Neale Hurston. So I was introduced to her ethnographies in graduate school, to her ethnography of the U.S. South, Mules and Men, and her ethnography of the Caribbean, Tell My Horse. And I became really interested in the fact that, okay, here is someone in the 30s who's interested in the diasporic ties, right, between Black people in the U.S. South and in the Caribbean. So much of Black studies discourse, when we think about when so much of the scholarship focuses on the ties between Black people in the urban North, in places like Chicago and New York and Philadelphia, right? And their ties to Black people in other parts of the world, or how Black people migrated away from the South, right, away from the Caribbean during the Great Migration and landed in those cities. And so we focus on the Harlem Renaissance and the New Negro movement and the kind of outpouring of literature, the outpouring of art, the outpouring of music, right, that happened during that movement in the 20s and 30s. But I grew up in Mississippi, as I said at the outset, and so as someone who migrated from Mississippi to New York in 2009.
Mm.
I realized that there was an imbalance in terms of the way that the field focused on what was happening outside of the South, but there wasn't enough emphasis on the people who stayed in the South or those people who migrated away from the South and then went to those cities and then
Right.
came back to the South, right? So I was curious about, well, we keep talking about what it means to be modern and sophisticated and intellectual and artistically and make, those folks who made artistic interventions. We keep talking about them, but they're all mostly based in, right, outside of the South. I wondered about my grandparents and I wondered about my grandparents. How did they understand themselves as being modern subjects, right? How did they understand themselves? I'm sure that they didn't understand themselves as being unsophisticated. I'm sure that they
Sure.
didn't understand
Sure.
themselves as being backwards and provincial, but because of the bias against the South, right? Because of the history of
Sure.
racial violence, right? That's
Sure.
typically how people outside of the region view Black folks in the
Yeah.
region.
Sure.
And so
Sure.
moving to New York, forced me to wrestle with my southernness, right? And so when I encountered Zora Neale Hurston's work, I thought, wow, here is this maverick of a Black woman moving all throughout the world, right? Or all throughout the hemisphere, we might say, as early as the 20s and 30s, documenting the richness, right, of Black dance, of Black religious practices, of Black music, of stories, etc. And she understood these Black folks as making a valuable contribution, right, to Black culture. She didn't want Black culture that had been sort of whitewashed, we might
I
say.
got
She
you.
wanted it in its purest and rawest form, right?
Let
And
me ask you
so
this.
and so
Let me
through
ask you.
her work,
Yeah.
yeah,
Go
through
ahead. Go ahead.
I'll just say through her work, I began to seek out other ways of understanding the dynamism and sophistication of Black life in the South and also its ties to the Caribbean.
How did you come up with that title?
That's a great question. So there's a scholar by the name of Saidiya Hartman. She's a professor at Columbia. She's one of my teachers, in fact. And she uses a term in her work entitled The Afterlives of Slavery, right? She coins this term. It's a book entitled Lose Your Mother. And this term has become so important in Black studies. It's in some ways it's become its own subfield. Um, but when she defines the afterlife of slavery, she's interested in the ways that slavery continues to negatively impact Black people in the present, right?
I
The
got you.
way that systemic oppression still leads to disparities in health, disparities in education, disparities in finances, in economics, and so forth and so on, right? And so she coins the way, or she coins this term to capture the way that as Black people living multiple generations from slavery, right? We are still experiencing we are still living in the world, I would say, that slavery produced, right? And so I was speaking with a scholar at Princeton. I was there for a postdoc. I just arrived. Her name is Tara Hunter. She's a historian there, a renowned historian. And she said, Jarvis, she asked me after I finished my dissertation, how does your work what do you think about Saidiya Hartman's concept of the afterlife of slavery? And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, I think my work is trying to grapple with the afterlife of the plantation, right? Because I understood that the plantation is a structure that existed both in the US South and in the Caribbean, right? And so I said, okay, Black people in these different regions of the Western Hemisphere after slavery ends, they're all trying to wrestle with the aftermath, right? Not only of enslavement, but of this space, right? Of this form of labor organizing, of this institution that continues to um, limit the kinds of futures that Black people actually have access to. And so we
Right.
have people like Booker T. Washington or the founders of Tougaloo College, my alma mater, who transformed a former cotton plantation into a school, right? A future-oriented institution for Black people to improve the lives of Black people, to sustain the lives of Black people, right? But then you also have companies like the United Fruit Company or the Delta and Pine Land Company, these corporate neo-plantations that sought to restrict Black people's lives to sharecropping and tenant farming and other forms of
I
expectation
got you.
of exploitation. And so I said, okay, one of the problems that we were wrestling with, right, in the aftermath of slavery was what to do with the plantation. Right, what to do, and so I saw that Black folks tried to transform the plantation, both the physical spaces and the logics of the plantation, property ownership and so forth and so on. They tried to transform those logics into something that would nourish Black life, whereas those corporate plantations and other entities, big planters who wanted to conscript Black people into debt, peonage, and so forth and so on, they wanted to maintain the status quo, right,
Let,
and
let,
keep
let, let
Black
me
people in positions of subjection.
let me ask you this. Uh, so you're saying in some instances there were black people who bought the land that was the plantation.
Absolutely. And they subdivided them into lots, right? Or they worked it in a kind of communal, right? And collaborative and collective format, right? Sharing resources, right?
Who sold it to
Taking,
them?
pardon?
Who sold them the land?
Sometimes it was the planters, sometimes the former slave owners. Tuskegee, Washington purchased Tuskegee from Colonel William Banks Bowen, who had been a plantation owner of the Bowen plantation, and he had been he was a veteran of the Confederate Army, right, as well.
So
And
this
he was
guy's got compassion and says, "Okay, I'll sell you the land."
I don't know that it was compassion. I wouldn't go that far. I think that it was that slavery was no longer economically viable, right? It was or
Oh,
excuse me, slavery had been abolished.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And so perhaps large scale agriculture was no longer economically viable because he now had to pay the people that he formerly owned.
I
Right.
got you.
And so I
I
don't
got
know that
you.
it was compassion per se, at
Yeah,
least
yeah,
in that instance. Right.
yes,
But it's
yes.
also the case that Southern land in the United States context was confiscated, right,
Yes,
by the Union Army, by the
that's
federal
right.
government. Right.
Yeah,
And
right.
so as a result, like we know about 40 acres and a mule, and
Exactly.
we know about the initial plan to redistribute that land, right, to formerly enslaved people. So
Right.
there were lots of different ways in which Black people came into ownership of sometimes the very plantations where they had been enslaved,
That's
sometimes
right.
other plantations, right? But in the case of Tougaloo, my alma mater, it was the American Missionary Association, which interestingly enough is the organization that was established after the Amistad Rebellion in the early part of the 19th century.
Right.
The AMA is the kind of byproduct of the Amistad. So I like to think about Tougaloo also as a kind of byproduct of the Amistad Rebellion. They purchased that land and established that school. So there were also missionary organizations, right, that were attempting to help resolve the problem that the South and that the nation confronted after slavery ended, which was essentially, what do we do with all these Black folk, right, who have been enslaved
Yes, I
here,
got you.
right?
I got you.
What do we do who are in poverty, right? Who don't have access to resources, who don't have an education? How do we help to materially improve their lives? And so what was so important, the United States was largely an agricultural country, right? At
Yes,
least
I
in the
got you.
South.
I
And
got you.
so
I got you.
Agriculture and land ownership was really important for self-determination and autonomy, right? For establishing that. And
That's right.
so, and so helping Black people to become landowners who could grow their own food, who could participate in the market economy as free laborers was an important strategy that was taken up in lots of different ways. Purchasing and repurposing and transforming a plantation was one way in which they did so.
One of the things that I know is that, and uh, it's more of a question. Tuskegee had more land than any other college in America. Almost, I know any. It's the largest landowner of the HBCUs. Is that correct?
I'm actually not sure about that. I don't have that
Because they
number
got
on the
fifty
top
two
of my.
hundred acres. Is one of the
Oh wow,
things that I know.
that is considerable. That is
Yeah,
considerable.
there's no
Yes,
question.
that is
No
considerable. I
question.
did not know that. Tougaloo had
Yeah,
500 acres. So I know they
yeah.
were, but so I know Tougaloo's numbers. I'm not sure about Tuskegee's, but they did continue to acquire land and property in that region. So I would
They
not
sure did.
be
Yeah, they
surprised.
sure.
Washington was very savvy in that regard.
Do me a favor.
Yes,
In your book, read me the title of three chapters that you want people to know about.
sure, 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 absolutely,
Not in any order, but
sure.
just tell me the three chapters. Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. Um, so to give you a good sense of a kind of okay, here we go. The title of the introduction is Regenerating Black Life in Plantation Ruins. Regenerating Black Life in Plantation Ruins.
Okay.
Um, the title of chapter one, An Experiment in Black World Making, Cultivating Intellectuals of the Land in the Alabama Countryside.
Hmm. All right.
Um, and then I'll give you the title of the last chapter of Ships and Plantations. Marcus Garvey in the UNIA's vision of a Pan-African agro-industrial empire.
Hmm. That's a whole lot of spear, isn't it?
That's a lot of,
A lot of what you covered
yes, yes,
to,
absolutely.
to go from there to Marcus Garvey.
Yes, I
Um.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the book is divided into three parts. The first part focuses on Tuskegee, and helps us to understand the intellectual and the aesthetic contributions of Tuskegee, particularly around soil regeneration and sort of environmentalism, right? So around sustainable agriculture, but also in terms of visual culture and music and performance culture, right? Understand. So I analyze photographs and I analyze um, the plantation melodies or the Negro spirituals to demonstrate the ways in which Tuskegee was a modern educational institution, although many scholars in Black studies tend to regard it as a backwards institution because it was primarily an industrial and agricultural school.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but I say no, no, no. If we look at the archive, to Tuskegee students and faculty and reading William Shakespeare, for instance, they're reading Charles Chestnut and Paul Laurence Dunbar and so forth and so on. I'm helping us to understand the ways in which the institution was much more progressive, at least in terms of its education, than simply teaching Black folk how to work, which is largely how how
Yeah.
how
That's
it
what
is
they were thought. They
regarded.
were thought of. Yeah. Right.
The second part of the book focuses on the ways that the Tuskegee idea and ideas from Tuskegee were translated and circulated to Black people in Cuba. Following the Spanish-American War in 1898, how they established a Booker T. Washington Institute, right? To how they admired, right, what was happening in the rural Jim Crow South at Tuskegee and wanted to replicate that, but also wanted to combine it with their own vision of what modernity and what self-determination meant, right, in the context of Cuba. And then the fourth chapter focuses on the ties between between Tuskegee and Haiti during the U.S. occupation of Haiti in the early part of the 20th century, and the ways that those ideas were circulated, right, to Haiti, because Haiti also was a primarily agricultural country. country, 98% agricultural in that period. And so some of their intellectuals, in particular, Jean Price Mars, who was the foremost Black intellectual, excuse me, Haitian intellectual of the 20th century, and is a father of a movement known as negritude, which you may be familiar with, you and your listeners or viewers may be familiar with. He was a father of that movement. He visited Tuskegee for 2 weeks in 1904 and returned to Haiti, invested in establishing schools throughout the Haitian countryside that were modeled on Tuskegee, right? And
Let,
then
let
the
me
and then
let me ask you
I'll
this
just say
question.
briefly,
Yeah,
the
go ahead. Go
final
ahead.
part of the book looks at Tuskegee students through Claude McKay, who is an important writer, Jamaican writer from the Harlem Renaissance, Zora Neale Hurston, and then Marcus Garvey as well, and looks at the ways that those students take up the Tuskegee or were educated in Tuskegee's curriculum, some ways directly, some ways indirectly, but also how they transform those ideas into their own visions of Black progress, of Black diasporic relation, and so forth and so on.
Let me ask you this, and that's all very, very good and very impressive.
Thank you.
No, ain't no question about that. Let me
Thank
ask you
you.
this: when you write a book like this, how much of this is a percentage of your own commentary?
Most of it is my own commentary. I am assembling the archive, right? So I'm assembling the literature as we discussed earlier. I'm assembling the newspaper articles. I'm assembling and then I am stitching it together, and I am analyzing it based on the historical moment in which I am writing about, right? So
Okay,
it is
okay.
someone else could have taken this archive and written a different story. They could have arrived at a different conclusion. So there is quite a bit of interpretation. But because my project is so archivally and historically rooted, right? It's not. It draws on the skills of literary analysis, right, and interpretation, but it is all rooted in historical fact and detail, right? And so I'm bringing those things together to give us a different way of understanding the South, the Caribbean, and the connections between those two places.
Oh,
So
I
there's
love it.
quite a bit of my commentary. Hopefully, when readers engage it, they hear my writerly voice, I suppose, and they find it to be a voice that is enjoyable to read and to sit with for such a sustained period of time.
Did when you did this, do you have to contemplate a whole lot of what to come to your conclusion? I know you got all this research
Hmm.
and you put it down and you got it all on the table or what have you. Then you got to say, okay, from this angle, this is what I'm gonna conclude.
Yes,
And do you
absolutely.
and then do you feel pressure making that conclusion?
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Because um, I don't know if pressure is it. I want to ensure that I am um, one of the things that I attempted to do in writing about a figure who is as uh, contentious, we'll say, as Booker T. Washington and Tuskegee, especially in Black studies. One of the things that I struggled with when I first embarked on the project was everything that everyone else had already said. All right.
Right.
And uh, Washington and his institution already have such a negative connotation in Black studies because of the Atlanta Exposition Address in 1895, now regarded as the Atlanta Compromise, wherein Washington, gave this famous speech in 1895. It's what thrust him into race leadership, wherein it's now called the Atlanta Compromise, where he accommodated, right, to social segregation in exchange for what he hoped was in exchange for economic cooperation and business cooperation between Black people and white people in the South, right?
Yeah.
So he
Yeah.
said, we won't worry about social equality or trying to be in social relations, right, with
Right.
white people. We will
Right.
focus on economic relationships, right, economic cooperation, because he believed that Black people needed the economic resources to be able to care for themselves, right,
Right.
in order to raise their families, to feed their families, etc. And so um, uh, Tuskegee's legacy, Washington's legacy, is sort of shrouded by that compromise, right? And
Okay.
also shrouded by um, the hegemony that Washington amassed over Black politics. I don't know that he was necessarily a nice person,
Oh, is
and
that
he
right?
certainly no.
Okay.
He. I will also say that he's a very difficult person to know. He wore many masks, so you're not really sure who is the which Booker T. Washington you're actually getting, right? He said different things to different audiences at different times, right? And also as a leader, his ideas and values changed over time. And so in Black studies, especially since the 60s, I would say, there's really been a kind of rejection of Washington and Tuskegee and of that particular model of Black leadership, of that particular model of 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 uh, of of Black leadership.
I got you.
And so my goal, what was challenging for me, was to figure out how to tell the story of Tuskegee in a more nuanced way that did not attempt to simply recuperate Washington. I'm not invested in saying you all got it wrong about Booker T. Washington. There are other scholars who've done that work. I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in what are the aspects of Booker T. Washington's archive? What are the aspects of his work that we've overlooked? Right?
I got you.
What are the aspects of Tuskegee in particular that we've overlooked, right? What can we learn from if this institution, if this political and educational project was attractive enough, right, to attract people from all across the Black diaspora? There must have been something significant about it, right? It became a symbol of Black autonomy, a symbol of Black self-determination. People are sending students to Tuskegee from places like, again, Cuba and Puerto Rico and Haiti and Guyana and the Panama Canal Zone, from West Africa, from South Africa. And so it had this international footprint and presence. And so I said to myself, if Tuskegee was attractive to a range of Black people from across the world in this way, right? We must be missing something as 20th and 21st century scholars who only view it, right, from a deficit perspective,
I
right?
got you. I
And
love it.
so I had to put myself in the mindset of Black people at the turn of the 20th century and say, what did they see in Tuskegee? What tools did they understand, right, that Washington was offering them for navigating the aftermath of slavery and the plantation when slavery was replaced by Jim Crow, right? Jim Crow segregation in the United States, and by colonialism and imperialism. So I had to put aside my own 20th century and 21st century bias, right? And step down off of my high horse and say, well, what would I have done, right? If I too were one or two generations removed from enslavement. And when I did that, I was able to hopefully I accomplished this. I was able to say, okay, this is where I think Booker T. Washington got it right. This is where I think he still got it wrong, right? And perhaps this is what I would have done differently, right?
Oh,
And to
all
try to
right.
hold
I love it.
him accountable
Okay.
for give Washington and the institution credit for what it enabled, right? For what it enabled for Black education. Washington partnered with the Julius Rosenwald
That's right. Sure did.
Foundation to
Sure
help
did.
establish schools all across the South
Yep.
because state governments and federal governments, right, abandoned Black people. They were
That's
not
right.
interested in Black education, right?
That's right.
So I said, listen, I get that Washington may have gotten it wrong politically. I'm not trying to say that that he got it right. I'm not interested in saying, oh yes, we
Right.
should have embraced,
Right.
a segregation. That's not
Right.
my argument whatsoever, right?
Right. Right.
I think that the hegemony, that the kind of influence that he had over Black politics, right, it went too far, right? We
Okay.
needed more voices, right, at the top, right? We need more examples and access to different avenues of success for Black people. But at
That's
that
right.
particular moment, right, the white establishment, the powers that be, they named one person, right, as the race leader, and Washington was the person who was dubbed the race leader, and so his philosophy won out during that period.
Let me
Yeah.
ask you this. Let me
Yes.
stop you because we almost
Sure.
coming to an end.
Sure.
But he also did the National Business League,
He did. He
which
did absolutely.
uplifted the black community in so many ways
Absolutely.
outside of the university in terms of the
Absolutely.
black business community.
Absolutely.
Do
Absolutely.
they kind of say, okay, maybe you got that, but we really like you for this?
You know, I have not seen, there are some scholars who have been more nuanced in their engagement with Washington and Tuskegee. But I've found that it depends on what's happening politically, I think, right?
Okay.
So you have someone like Manning Marable,
Yeah,
who
I
in
know
the
that name.
70s and 80s, right,
Yeah,
gave us a more balanced portrait of Tuskegee. And then you have more recently someone like Frank Gurity, whose work was really important, who wrote about Tuskegee's influence in Cuba in the kind of Hispanophone Caribbean, mostly Cuba, but Cuba and Puerto Rico as well. And someone
yeah,
who's able to again hold Washington accountable for his shortcomings, right? But
yes,
also saying yes, and right, this is what was possible by sending black students from Cuba to Tuskegee. They return to Cuba. They become a part of the black middle class, and they have a positive impact in their communities as a result. We might say, right?
I love it.
And so
Um,
I think
yes,
that there are some scholars who are invested in a more nuanced approach, and there are other scholars who say, you know what? Um, the impact of what Washington did, right, was far outweighed the benefits. And I'm trying to reclaim some of those benefits by putting them on the table and saying, hey, I don't think we've thought, seriously about the ways that Tuskegee influenced sustainable agriculture, influenced the lives of black farmers, and black people who even if they were trained in industries and agriculture at Tuskegee, who went on to become writers and politicians in any number of professions, right, and careers, but who had their start at a place like Tuskegee and were able to benefit from the kind of social cachet, right,
yes.
of that institution.
Well, one more question. Has
Yes.
the university embraced the book? I mean, have they gotten it and said, man, I'm glad you wrote it and have you come speak, if I may ask?
Tuskegee
Tuskegee,
itself,
yes,
or
yes, yes.
not yet. But the book just came out in May. So
Okay.
it just came out in May.
All right. Well, they're
So
gonna do it. They're gonna do
I
it.
I certainly
Yeah.
hope so. I certainly
Yeah.
hope
I
so.
know some
I've had a
Tuskegee
great
people.
relationship.
I got
I've had a
I
great
got
relationship
contacts.
with their archivist there. And
Yes.
they've been very helpful to me. I could not have written this book without the kindness of the archivist and the community there. So I hope that
Yes.
they'll read it, and I hope that they'll engage it, and I would love to go there and talk to the students and other faculty about
Yeah.
the stories that I have
Yeah. Yeah. You've uncovered. Yes.
recovered here. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I thank you so very much. Uh, Very well presented.
Thank you.
You a
Thank you.
scholar,
Thank you.
and we can tell that. There's
Thank you
no
very
question.
much. I appreciate it.
And everybody go get that book
Yes,
and
please.
read
Yes,
it
please. That's
thoroughly.
right.
Yeah,
Afterlives of the
there it is.
Plantation. That's
Yeah,
right.
go get that book.
Please.
Um, again, thank you so very much. Everybody, hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. You see how we do? Hit the like button. There is no love button. Hit the notifications bell for when the videos come up, you get notified. Tell somebody about Strong Inspirations and get that book. I'm gonna go back to
Yeah.
it. How long did it take you to write it?
So, more than a decade, actually.
Really?
Yes, sir. Yeah, it was my doctoral dissertation, so I spent 3 years researching it there. And then after that, about ten more years before it was actually in print.
Really?
Yes,
You
sir.
never
Yes,
quit.
sir.
You
I
didn't
never
quit on
quit.
it.
No, I didn't. I felt like I wanted to at
I
times.
can't imagine.
Yes, yes, yes. It was certainly a labor of love, emphasis on
Yes.
labor, emphasis on love.
Yes.
But I knew that it was a story that was near and dear to me, and that was, that needed to be told. And so I'm grateful that I persevered, and that so far it has been well received, and I hope that it will continue to be so.
Oh, I'm sure it will. Yeah, very
Thank
well
you.
written. No misspelled words. The grammar is good,
That's right. That's right. That's right.
and the
And
thought process. We
yeah,
got you there.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
everybody go to the website. Do you have a website where people can contact you? Is that
I
do you
do.
public speaking? How do people reach you and that kind of
Yes.
thing?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I am on all forms of social media, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn under Prof McInnes, ProfMcInnis on IG and Twitter, and then on LinkedIn and Facebook, just my name, Jarvis McInnes.
There you go.
And then I do have a website. It's just jarvismcinnis.com.
There you go.
There you
There you go.
go.
Let's pub that, everybody. All that will be in the description also, so you can reach out to this young man here, and support the cause,
Thank you.
and read the other side of the coin,
Yes,
about
absolutely.
a brother, Booker T. Washington. I
Yeah,
thank you so very much for coming on the show. Everybody, go to my website. I'm not as prolific as that, but nonetheless, I because of him, I become more prolific.
okay.
And so, businessintheblack.net, get you a copy of this book. All
Absolutely.
right. And then to you, my brother, and I say this, and I mean this with all sincerity, I
Yes,
want
sir.
you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love
Absolutely.
who you become. You took
Thank you.
that that Gulfport environment, and it shaped you
Yes.
and allowed you to become very astute.
Thank
That's
you.
evident.
Thank
And
you.
then to use that astuteness for us to understand one of the pillars of our community,
That's right.
the
That's
Booker
right.
T. Washington, and all the others that you bring in as you teach those classes and
That's
the
right.
English and the understanding of the history from a Black perspective.
That's it. That's it.
Thank you so very much for doing that. I appreciate you. I'm going to
Thank you
stay
for
in
having me,
touch. I
Mr.
want to meet
Brogdon.
you. Yes, thank you again.
Absolutely.
With that, I'll say bye-bye. We out.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.